Welcome to this new video on the Reddit Storylane. I was filled with excitement at the thought of spending Christmas with my husband Antoine's family, despite the past tensions with my mother-in-law Giselle. I sincerely hoped that the holiday spirit would bring peace and harmony. In the days leading up to Christmas Eve, I had thrown myself wholeheartedly into the preparations, determined to make the evening unforgettable. On the morning of December 24th, I woke up at dawn. Our small Parisian apartment was silent. Antoine was still asleep. I made coffee and sat down by the window, watching the snowflakes fall gently on the rooftops of the city. This year will be different, I told myself. This year, I will finally be part of the family. With renewed energy, I began wrapping the gifts I had carefully chosen for each member of Antoine's family. A scarf from a fashion house Giselle adored, a rare edition of a book on the history of Burgundy for Jean-Pierre, Antoine's father, a fine wine set for Mathieu, Antoine's brother, and his wife Sophie, and educational toys for the children that I had spent hours selecting. 00:33. You're already up? Antoine's sleepy voice startled me. He came up behind me, wrapping his arms around me. Are you sure you want to go? We could stay here, just the two of us. I smiled, touched by his concern. No, it's fine. I want this to work this time. It's important to me, to us. He nodded, not entirely convinced. All right, but promise me that if it goes wrong, we'll leave. I promise, I said, crossing my fingers behind my back. The drive to the family house in the Paris suburbs was silent. Antoine drove, focused on the snowy road, while I mentally repeated the conversation topics I had prepared. Gardening for Giselle, politics for Jean-Pierre, the latest films for Mathieu and Sophie. I was ready. When we arrived, the house was already buzzing with activity. The children's laughter echoed from the garden where a snowman was taking shape. Giselle greeted us at the door, her face displaying a smile I wanted to believe was sincere. 2:22. Antoine, my darling, she exclaimed, kissing her son, then turning to me. Isabel, you look well. Thank you, Giselle. I brought a chocolate Yule log, your favorite, if I remember correctly, I said, handing her the carefully wrapped cake. Oh, how kind, she replied, taking the box by the edges, as though afraid to get her hands dirty. But I've already made one. Tradition, you know. I felt my smile waver, but quickly regained composure. It was just the beginning. The evening was still long. Inside, the atmosphere was warm. The Christmas tree sparkled with 1,000 lights. Garlands illuminated the living room, and the scent of cinnamon and orange floated in the air. Jean-Pierre greeted us warmly, a glass of wine in hand. Ah, here you are. Come, come, warm up by the fire. 3:35. I spent the next hour helping in the kitchen, listening to Giselle talk about her preparations, agreeing and complimenting each dish. Despite my efforts to engage her in conversation about her garden, she remained distant, responding with one-word answers. Dinner was finally served. Sitting between Antoine and Mathieu, I did my best to participate in the conversations, laughing at family jokes I only half understood, nodding at anecdotes I had already heard a dozen times. So, Isabel, Jean-Pierre interjected between bites of turkey, how's work going? Still in advertising? Digital marketing, actually, I gently corrected. It's going very well, thank you. We just launched a campaign for, these modern things, he interrupted, waving his hand. In my day, we didn't need all that to sell. I felt Antoine's hand rest on mine under the table, a silent gesture of support. Despite the little jabs, the meal proceeded relatively peacefully. The children enthusiastically shared their experiences with Santa at the mall. Sophie talked about her plans for the upcoming year, and even Giselle seemed to have relaxed after a few glasses of wine. As we enjoyed dessert, Giselle's Yule log, not mine, I dared to think that perhaps finally things would improve. Maybe this Christmas night would mark a new beginning in my relationship with Antoine's family. 4:44. The clock struck midnight, and the children's eyes lit up. Presents! They cried in unison, rushing toward the tree. Carefully, little monsters, said Harimthu, following them. We all gathered around the tree, excitement palpable in the air. I watched with joy as the children tore open their presents, their shouts of joy filling the room. Antoine opened my gift, a vintage watch he had coveted for a long time, and kissed me tenderly. "Thank you, my love," he whispered. "It's perfect." Gifts were exchanged and opened. Giselle faked a surprise when she opened her scarf, but I saw her gently caress it with appreciation. Jean-Pierre was more demonstrative, immediately flipping through his book with a smile on his face. The euphoria of the gift exchange gradually calmed down, and I realized with a pang in my heart that no gift had been meant for me. I looked around, perhaps searching for a forgotten gift, but there was nothing. 5:54. "Well," Giselle said, getting up and smoothing her dress, "I think it's time to clean up this mess." I swallowed hard, trying to hide my disappointment. After all, gifts weren't the most important thing, right? The important thing was being together as a family. As I bent down to pick up scraps of wrapping paper, I heard Sophie whisper to Mathieu, "We didn't get anything for Isabelle." Mathieu shrugged, glancing briefly at his mother. "Mom said she'd take care of it." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. They had discussed me, decided not to give me anything. It wasn't an oversight, it was a deliberate act. I felt tears welling up, but I forced myself to hold them back. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. 6:28. Raising my head, I met Giselle's gaze. Her expression was a mix of triumph and barely concealed contempt. In that moment, I knew that despite all my efforts, I would never truly be accepted into this family. The Christmas spirit I had hoped for had failed to break down the barriers, and as the evening came to an end, I wondered how much longer I could endure this situation. How many more Christmases would I have to endure before I would finally be considered one of them? The silence that followed the gift exchange was deafening. There I was, sitting in the middle of this family that still did not accept me, surrounded by crumpled gift wrap and scattered ribbons. The excitement of Christmas had dissipated, leaving behind a palpable tension in the air. Antoine, my husband, seemed uncomfortable. He cast furtive glances between his mother and me, as if searching for a way to ease the tension. But what could he say? What could he do? The damage had already been done. 7:32. "Well," Giselle finally broke the silence. "I think it's time for one last drink before we go to bed. Isabelle, my dear, could you help me clear up?" Her sweet tone fooled no one. It was an order disguised as a polite request. I silently nodded and stood to accompany her to the kitchen. My legs trembled slightly under the weight of the contained emotion. In the kitchen, Giselle began putting dishes in the dishwasher with sharp movements. I could feel her disapproval emanating from her like toxic fumes. "Giselle," I said gently, "did I do something to offend you?" She froze for a moment, then turned to me with a cold, offended smile. "No, my dear. Why would you think that?" I took a deep breath. "It's just that I didn't receive a gift tonight. I thought maybe—" "Oh, that," she said, waving her hand as though it were an insignificant detail. "Don't be so materialistic, Isabelle. Christmas isn't just about gifts, you know." Those words hit me like a slap. Materialistic? Me, who had spent weeks carefully choosing gifts for each of them. 9:24. "It's not about materialism," I replied, my voice trembling slightly. "It's about inclusion, about family." Giselle noisily dropped a plate in the sink. "Listen to me, Isabelle," she said, her voice cold and firm. "You're not family. You're the woman Antoine chose, and we respect his choice, but don't misunderstand us. You're not one of us." Those words took my breath away. I stood there, speechless, unable to respond. So this was it. After 3 years of marriage, after all my efforts to integrate, I was still nothing but a stranger in their eyes. 10:05. "Giselle, She cut me off. "You want the truth? Here it is. You are nothing without us. Without Antoine, without this family. What would you be? A mere office worker with dreams of grandeur. You already have more than you deserve." Her cruel words echoed in the kitchen. I felt tears rise to my eyes, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me cry. At that moment, Antoine entered the kitchen. "Is everything okay in here?" he asked, sensing the tension. "Perfectly fine," Giselle replied with a forced smile. "Isn't that right, Isabel?" I could only nod, my throat tight with emotion. It was still early, but I knew she would understand. "Hello," her sleepy voice answered after a few rings. "Marie, it's me. I'm sorry to call so early, but I need a place to go." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Then Marie said, "Come right away. I'll put the coffee on." I felt a surge of gratitude towards my friend. "Thank you, Marie. I'm on my way." In the taxi that took me to Marie's place, I watched the streets of Paris pass by, still decorated for the holidays. The garlands and illuminated trees now seemed cruelly ironic. Christmas, the holiday of family and love, had been the catalyst for my decision to leave everything behind. When I arrived at Marie's, I was greeted by her warm embrace. Without a word, she let me in and guided me to her couch. She placed a steaming cup of coffee in front of me and sat beside me, patiently waiting for me to be ready to talk. "I left Antoine," I finally said, breaking the silence. Marie nodded, showing no surprise. "Because of his family?" I added. I nodded, then unloaded everything. The Christmas dinner, the lack of gifts, Giselle's cruel words. Marie listened without interrupting, her face reflecting alternating anger, sadness, and outrage. "Oh, Isabel," she said when I finished. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that, but I'm proud of you for making that decision." Those words warmed my heart. For the first time since the previous day, I felt like I had made the right choice. "What are you going to do now?" Marie asked. I took a sip of coffee, thinking about the question. "I don't know yet, but I do know one thing. I can't go on like this. I can't be this diminished version of myself anymore." Marie placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "You're right. You deserve so much better, Isabel. You're brilliant, talented, and you should never have to feel like nothing for anyone." Those words resonated with a thought that had been growing in me since I woke up. "You know," I said slowly, "I've always wanted to start my own digital marketing business. Maybe now's the time." Marie's face lit up. "That's a great idea. You've always been good at that, and you have contacts in the industry, right?" I shook my head, feeling a spark of excitement light up in me for the first time in a long while. "Yes, I've kept in touch with several former clients, and I have savings I set aside just in case." "Just in case you needed to escape," Marie guessed perceptively. I smiled weakly. "I suppose so. Part of me maybe knew this day would come." Marie hugged me. "You're going to make it, Isabel. You're stronger than you think, and I'll be here for you every step of the way." Those words gave me the courage I needed. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I felt like myself again. Not the stepdaughter of someone, not someone's wife, just Isabel, a woman with dreams, ambitions, and the strength to make them happen. Sitting on Marie's couch, my suitcase at my feet, and a cup of coffee in hand, I felt a wave of determination wash over me. This wasn't the end, but a new beginning. And despite the pain and uncertainty, I was ready to face it. "Marie," I said, "I think I'm going to need a decent computer and a lot of coffee. We've got a business to launch." Marie raised her eyes, shining with pride and excitement. "That's the Isabel I know. Let's get to work." And so, in my best friend's small apartment, on the day after a disastrous Christmas, I began to take control of my life. The road would be long and difficult, I knew that. There would be moments of doubt, fear, maybe even regret. But one thing was certain. I was no longer nothing. I was Isabel, and I was ready to show the world, and most importantly, myself, what I was capable of. The days following my arrival at Marie's were a whirlwind of activity, between working on my business plan and calling up former clients. I hardly had time to think about Antoine or his family, but I knew this bubble of relative peace wouldn't last forever. It was the morning of the day when reality caught up with me. My phone vibrated, showing a message from Antoine. "Isabel, we need to talk. I'll be at Marie's in an hour. Please don't leave." I felt my heart race. Part of me wanted to run, avoid the confrontation, but I knew it was inevitable and maybe even necessary. "Are you okay?" Marie asked, noticing my troubled expression. I showed her the message. She nodded in understanding. "Do you want me to stay?" "No," I replied after a moment of thought. "This is something I have to face alone." The hour that followed was the longest of my life. I tried to focus on my work, but my thoughts kept returning to Antoine, what he would say, what I would say. When the doorbell rang, I jumped despite myself. Marie gave me a brief hug before leaving the apartment, leaving me alone to face what would come next. I opened the door, my heart pounding. Antoine stood there looking tired and anxious. His eyes immediately landed on my suitcase still by the door. "You haven't unpacked," he said softly. "No," I admitted. "I don't know how long I'll be staying here." He nodded, understanding. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside to let him in. We sat on the couch, an uncomfortable space between us. "Isabel," he began, "I'm so sorry for everything that's happened. I talked to my mom. I told her that her behavior was unacceptable." I felt a wave of frustration rise in me. "Antoine, it's not for you to fix. It's not just about your mother. It's deeper than that." He looked at me, puzzled. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath. "Antoine, since we've been married, I feel like I've lost a part of myself. I've tried so hard to fit into your family, to meet their expectations, that I've forgotten who I really am." His eyes filled with sadness. "I didn't want you to change for me or my family. I love you as you are." "I know you love me," I replied gently. "But sometimes love isn't enough. I need to find myself again, to become the strong, independent woman I was before." He reached out to take my hand, but stopped halfway, uncertain. "And you think you can't do that with me?" The question hit me hard. Could I rebuild myself while staying married to Antoine? Was it possible to reconcile my love for him and my need for freedom? "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "All I know is that I need space and time to think." Antoine nodded slowly, pain visible in his eyes. "I understand. But Isabel, I want you to know I'm ready to do whatever it takes for this to work between us. If you want us to distance ourselves from my family, we will. If you want us to move to another city, I'll follow. I don't want to lose you." His words touched me deeply. I knew he was sincere, and part of me wanted to throw myself into his arms, forget everything else. But I couldn't. Not now. "Antoine, I appreciate that, really, but it's not up to you to make those sacrifices. It's up to me to find out who I am and what I truly want." He nodded, resigned. "And your work? Are you going back to the office?" I took a deep breath. This was the moment to tell him about my plans. "Actually, I've decided to start my own digital marketing business." His eyes widened in surprise. "Really? But when?" "Since I've been here," I replied. "I've been thinking about it for a long time, but I never had the courage to take the plunge. Now, I feel ready." Antoine looked at me with a mix of pride and sadness. "You've always been brilliant in this field. I'm sure you'll succeed." His support, even in these difficult circumstances, moved me. "Thank you, Antoine." An uncomfortable silence settled between us. There was so much left unsaid, so many emotions hanging in the air. Finally, Antoine stood up. "I guess I should go," he said. "But Isabel, promise me one thing." "What?" I asked, my heart tightening. "Don't make any permanent decisions just yet. Give us a chance. Give yourself time to really think about what you want." I nodded, unable to speak. He leaned down to kiss me on the forehead, a tender gesture that reminded me why I had married him in the first place. As he headed for the door, I found the strength to speak. "Antoine, wait." He turned, hope shining in his eyes. "I'm going back to the apartment tonight to collect a few things." He nodded. "Okay." Do you want me to be there? I shook my head. No, I'd prefer to go alone, but maybe we could have dinner together afterward, to talk. A small smile lit up his face. I'd like that. After he left, I sat on the couch, lost in thought. The conversation had been difficult, but necessary. Now I had another challenge to face, returning to our apartment. That evening, I took a taxi back to our place. Every familiar street brought up memories, some happy, some painful. When I arrived,